Without further ado, I wanted to introduce Christy. It's a little intimidating to have you on we're talking about public speaking, and here we are speaking and sort of in public.
You're doing great,
But
Tim. You're doing great.
but Christy has tons and tons of experience in training professionals across lots of industries. I had to cut it off somewhere as far as your experience and background goes, but beginning in TV broadcasting as a journalist, as an anchor, as a weather chief, and I know there's much more, but just I think to have Christy on to talk to us about how to, I think, approach the whole subject is going to be very cool. So thank you for joining us, and I'm
Thank you
excited
for
to
having
be a
me.
part of it today.
Yes, I thank you for having me today. And it's nothing to be afraid of, which I know is easy to say because people put fear of public speaking up there with give me a root canal, take away all of my belongings, take my car off a cliff before I have to public speak. But my goal
Right.
for today is to give you some tactical tips and tricks to make you feel more comfortable, to make sure your message is landing, and that the whole point of presenting that you achieve that you reach your goal through the way that you present.
Right. That's awesome. So I thought we would maybe start a little bit from the beginning. I've always thought, I mean, I know that it can be learned as well, but there are always people that just seem to have the gift
Yeah.
of public speaking, and I wonder, is that how it came for you, or kind of what was your intro into public speaking in the first place?
The intro is a big fat no. And I want to put an emphasis on that because something that I see frequently with clients is what you just said. They come to me and say, I don't have that natural charisma, or I don't have that natural je ne sais quoi. There's always that person that walks in the room that can just captivate everybody. And it's often we think someone who is outgoing, just is completely confident in themselves. And yes, there are those people that are very confident and speak a lot. But the people who can speak a lot and loudly don't necessarily have a lot to say. And I discovered that quickly as a journalist in interviewing thousands of people. The people who we would consistently bring back to interview to use as our subject matter experts on a story, on a really important case that we were following, would be people who were not just subject matter experts, but also could describe it in a digestible and interesting way. So
Mm.
either one on its own is not enough. You can be the expert in your field, but if you present it in a way that's dry, that's boring, that's overcomplicated, you lose your audience. You
Right.
can also be razzle dazzle, all showman or showwoman, and not have the substance. It's the combination of the two that makes somebody have that it factor that you're talking about. And for me, I was a very shy child. I was a very quiet child. I spent a lot of time hiding in cabinets. If you ask my mom as a kid, I spent a lot of quiet alone time reading, on my own, close to my family. I was the kid at birthday parties that was kind of to the side near the adults and not playing with everybody else. And in kindergarten, I share this memory because I think so often we have these powerful things that happen to us, especially when we're young, that just cement a memory in our head. And I, in kindergarten, had the chance to try out for the Wizard of Oz school play. And this was a big deal for me because I was a Wizard of Oz freak. I had multiple pairs of ruby slippers. I knew every line of every song. Maybe for people with kids at home now, it is, they're singing something from Frozen or whatever the modern version is. But for me, it was Wizard of Oz. And I always, in the quiet and safety of my own home, played Dorothy by myself. So this was my chance in the school play to get to be Dorothy. You've arrived in life when you're 6 and you get to be Dorothy in the school play.
Right.
And it got to the day of auditions, and I wanted nothing more than to get to be Dorothy, which you have to try out for Dorothy to be Dorothy.
Mm.
And as the teacher went around the room and said, who wants to try out to be a witch, the witch, okay, who wants to try out to be the Tin Man, who wants to try out to be a Munchkin, I raised my hand to be a Munchkin. It was, the invasion of the body snatchers. Why is my hand going up? Why am I volunteering to be a munchkin? I want to be Dorothy. And although at 5 or 6, I didn't really understand why, it was that fear of putting myself out there, fear of judgment, fear of being in front of the room. I can't be Dorothy. I'm going to do it wrong and everybody will judge me. I couldn't articulate it that much, but I knew it inside. So here I
Right.
was. I ended up being a munchkin. Somebody else was Dorothy. And I look at those photos now as an adult, and it makes me a little bit sad but it was a powerful moment where I realized, hey, if I really want to get where I want to go in life, if I want to be the main part and not a side part, a supporting role over here, I'm going to have to get over this. Now, can look at this as an adult with that introspection. I think at five
Yeah.
or six, I just knew I wanted something, and being in the back row was not going to get me there. And so my journey over the next 10, 20 years was overcoming a lot of that fear of judgment. And this is something, by the way, I see in the C-suite all the time. That same behavior you see in a 5 or 6 year old, it's a different version when we
Yeah.
end up 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, that we may be known as the expert in our space. But when it comes to speaking, performing, being in front of a group, our fight or flight response kicks in and we
Yeah.
have this tremendous fear of, I'm going to be judged. I'm going to be shown not to be the person who everybody thinks I am. I'm competent in my space and my craft, but when it comes to performing or presenting it, I'm afraid I'm going to be seen as a fraud. A lot of the work that I do with people is mindset based, getting them over those self-limiting beliefs, getting them to truly believe that they are the expert in their space, learning to
Right.
craft content and deliver it in a way that serves the audience and makes it about the audience and not about them. So over the years, I eventually did get more comfortable with participating in the speech and debate team eventually in high
Mm.
school, and then went on to really tackle it head on and throw myself off the cliff, if you will, saying, hey, let me
Yeah.
do the scariest thing possible. I'm going to go and become a TV broadcaster, and then enjoyed a almost 20-year career as a corporate spokesperson and as a journalist doing that.
Wow. So I think the biggest thing, I mean, because that's before we getting into even the speaking, it's just the mindset is,
Yeah.
but how did you do that? I mean, because I think that sounds more daunting than the speaking after getting your mind over the fear of doing it in the first place.
Yeah. Well, I share with people my degree, my undergrad degree is neuro and social psych. And when I graduated from Duke and was deciding where I wanted to go to grad school, it was either to continue in psychology or to pursue journalism. And I ended up pursuing journalism because I thought, just knowing the state of the industry, you can be a shriveled old woman in an armchair and be wise at 90 and be a great rock star therapist. The world for women in TV is not so kind. So I figured I'd pursue that path first. But I always, always tap into my undergrad research and the degree and the work that I do with people to overcome these self-limiting beliefs. So a lot of it is going back to, at the core, your why. Don't know if you're familiar with Simon Sinek's famous. He has a
Yeah.
YouTube video that's gone viral, looking at your why and the why of companies. Well, it's true as an individual. When you are going to give a presentation, whether it's a keynote speech, a presentation in a boardroom, you're sitting on a podcast, you have to ask the question of, what is my deep why? And it can't be, I want to get more customers and clients. I want to get more exposure. Because when you have that mindset, you go into any communication in a self-serving manner, and the stakes are very high in our mind because we're
Yeah.
thinking, if I don't present this well, I'm going to lose that opportunity to get the client, to get the promotion, to get the partnership. When you flip the script and really dig to figure out, for me, my why is to help people reach their highest career goals through being a good communicator. If I focus my why on that and everything is of service to the person I'm coaching or training, I can show up much more confidently, knowing if I slip or flub here or there, the person I'm trying to help isn't going to judge me. They're going to say, Christy is doing her best to really help me get where I need to go. And the same is true whether you're presenting a workshop to a group of employees, you're presenting on a stage. Audience is king. We think of a speaker as being in control, or the communicator. I have the microphone, I have the bright light on me. No, no, no. The audience is always the hero of the story. And so part of the mindset shift is, how can I be of service to them? How
Hmm.
can I structure my communications clearly that's of the most service to my group? How can I present my message in a way that's interesting, entertaining if possible? You can take the driest subject and make it entertaining. That's the hallmark of a good communicator. And
Right.
that's what people remember. You don't want to bore your audience to death. You want to educate them, inform them, and hopefully elevate them in the process so that they walk away and say, "Hey, what Tim shared with me in that presentation or that speech or even that phone call, really landed with me. I can tell that his why is very deep." So that's often step one within the mindset work we do.
Hmm. So probably having a helps to have a passion for what it is that you're doing, I would imagine, right?
Yeah, you have to. I tell people, if you don't, you are in the wrong job. And it's
Yeah.
part of what motivated me to go out on my own and start my own business. I was very passionate about journalism for a long time, but the pattern I saw again and again, especially in media, is whether you're a research scientist, an attorney, an architect, a dog trainer, we live in a culture that you're expected to be your own brand now, whether you work inside of a company or you have your own business. So you have to be able to communicate your unique value and show people that you are the go-to person, the go-to expert in that space for people to want to engage with you. So you have to have that passion.
Right. So you mentioned so the mindset, that's the mindset. I mean, so talking about how you learn to become a great speaker. Obviously, so the mindset aspect um, seems pretty foundational, I think, as
Yeah.
far as getting before you can really get to the next step, the next steps. But what are the next steps? I think that, for being a great speaker.
Yeah. I approach any communications training, whether it's preparing for a speech, whether it's managing your team, whether it's sitting as a thought leader on a panel, as a three-pronged approach. So mindset is the first piece, and it's much deeper than what we've described, but we don't have time to get too much into it today. But it's
Right.
tackling those limiting beliefs. It is in your own mind, discovering how you can be of unique service to your audience. Second piece is messaging. And the third piece is delivery. People often jump over one and two and they go straight to three, Tim. They
Right.
say, "Christy, make me a compelling communicator or help me communicate better with my teams. How do I do it with my voice and my gestures?" The way that you communicate through nonverbals is absolutely important. In fact, up to some studies show 70 to 90% of our communication is outside of the words we are saying.
Right.
But you have to really solidify that messaging. That's piece number two. And it's becoming crystal clear on what your core messages are connected to your offering, to your company, to the whatever the topic is that you're training or speaking on, and not just jotting down a million and one bullet points. Because how many times have we been in a presentation that it just is the floodgates have opened,
Yeah.
the presenter or speaker is dumping all of this knowledge, we're on our phones playing Candy Crush or thinking about, did I need to get milk at the grocery store, or my kids, do I get them at
Yeah.
3:30 today? We just tune out. So
Yeah.
it's
Did I
being
leave the
very,
oven on?
yeah, did I leave the oven on? Is the tea kettle on?
Yeah.
It's about crafting messaging that is tasty to our brain. And what I mean by that is that it elicits some type of emotion or reaction. And the world of media and the world of advertising are great at doing this. Now, I'll pause for a moment and say, media and advertising get a bad rap a lot of times of they manipulate people, they spin words. It's not about spinning what you're doing. It's about presenting information in the words that you use, in the length of sentences, in the way that you contrast themes and emotions. It's using all of those types of techniques to deliver messages that people remember and that elicit some sort of emotion. And it's all about creating contrast in your messaging. So I want you to think about, we'll go back to The Wizard of Oz, since clearly it's a favorite movie of mine. The Wizard of Oz is not a story of, there was a girl named Dorothy. She lived in Kansas. A tornado went by down the street. Then Dorothy went back out to help Auntie Em bake the pie. It's pretty boring, right?
Right.
Instead, it is the girl in Kansas. She's unhappy. This big event happens. A tornado lifts her up. Then she's at safety in Oz, and she has a guide within Glenda. But then she encounters all of these apples throwing tree throwing apples at her, and then she meets a nice friend. There's a contrast and a rhythm of up and down. And every communication that you make, whether it's a slogan for your business, whether it's talking points for a media interview, whether it's a
Mhm.
full speech, has to have that rhythm and contrast, or your audience tunes out.
Right.
And it's also looking at your message. How are you creating what I call a chemical cocktail in your audience? And this is where I tap into some of that psychology background. You want to be creating moments in your communications that are creating excitement, creating a hit of dopamine, because when dopamine's released in our brain, it's like a post-it note. So
Yeah.
think of your favorite kind of cliffhanger movie where you're sitting on the edge of your seat and waiting to see what happens next. Those principles that filmmakers use, that novelists use, to be effective communicators, we need to use that inside of our own communications as well. And on the flip side, as a leader, if you're trying to create trust and connection with your audience, gone are the days when you can be a leader that is just dictating, this is the way it is from the front of the room. It's about creating space for even vulnerability with your teams, vulnerability with your audiences, sharing your failures and your challenges. Some of the best entrepreneurs out there and the best communicators, whether it's Richard Branson, whether it's Jack Ma with Alibaba, whether it's Brene Brown, the reason they're so beloved in their respected spaces of expertise is that they share their own failures along the way. They share stories of themselves and their clients, their family members. So it makes them human to their audience. The
Yeah.
last thing you want to do is be the dictator at the front of the room saying, "I know the way. I'm the expert. Here's how you want to do it."
Right.
And then delivery, that last component is everything from breathing technique to what I call the walk up routine. I think every communicator, and especially in stressful communications, needs a walk up routine just like an athlete. So
Right.
you wouldn't go run in the Olympics in a relay race, stepping outside your Honda Civic, tying your sneakers, and then walking up. No, you would do tons of stretching and warming up. And as a communicator, you need to warm up two things. You need to warm up your instrument, so your voice, your face, because our formation of words and articulation has to do with warming up those muscles, and even warming up your body, getting out some of that anxious energy before, and there's exercises you can do for that, and then warming up your mind. Before I came on the show with you today, Tim, I wrote down key concepts I wanted to touch on, and I spoke them aloud to myself as I was putting on my makeup this morning. So getting in that routine of starting the communication before you ever are on stage or on the spot to give it.
Right. Yeah, I think I shared with you whenever I give public speeches, I mean, I can, and I have I've always felt fairly natural, which isn't, but preparation is key, as you mentioned. I think being authentic, like you were talking about, Richard Branson, is
Mm-hmm.
key. Having the message, tying those things together. Even if I have all that, when I would walk out on stage, my heart I just knew this, like the first like 2 minutes probably was like beating out of my chest. So
Yes.
I had to have something kind of prepared, a joke or something that would actually, for me, take the spotlight off of me for a minute,
Yes.
so I could breathe, get comfortable, and then it was fine.
Yep.
But
And
it's
that's a great approach, Tim. Having connecting with your audience as early as possible is one of the best ways to diminish those nerves. So depending on who you're speaking to, you may have a lot of access to them or you may have very little. Let's say that you are speaking at a conference. I always recommend, people often say, I want to be in the back room. I need to be alone. I need to be collecting my thoughts. That's the way I used to be. That is who I was growing up, and before I learned that getting in that rhythm of getting the flywheel going, if you will,
yeah,
requires that you go out into that lobby and talk to some of the people who are going to be in your audience, because what that immediately does is it humanizes the scary audience that's in front of you, the predator, if you will. If we can run with the analogy of caveman cavewoman times, our bodies are reacting. Your body, with your heart pounding out of your chest, Tim, was the caveman cavewoman seeing the hungry animal. And that's why you're standing there, even if it's subconscious, thinking, I may be judged, I may forget what I'm going to say. I may
Right.
stumble, and the hungry animal's coming after me. Well, what's the best way to teach your body that this animal's not going to attack? It's going and having the conversation with the person in the lobby. It is engaging them off the top. Like you said, cracking a joke if that makes you comfortable. I
Hmm.
love to start presentations asking the audience a question,
Yeah.
making it interactive, making it a dialogue. So the more that we can mimic a conversation at all times in every communication, the better it is received by our audience and the less stressful that it is for us as the speaker. Yes, public speaking can be a performance, but really good presenters and speakers make it a conversation. And it's the reason why people are drawn toward, oh, I love this news anchor on Channel 15, or I really love listening to this radio host, or gosh, my boss just I'm always entertained. He has the best stories when numbers are down and we need to be elevated. He can always give us that pep talk that lifts us up. It's
Right.
because you're connecting to the person you're speaking to like a human being. You're
Right.
removing that wall between you.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe be a little vulnerable or self-deprecating, things like that
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
help. So I think so. I guess the next aspect of it then is like, what tools do you use to accomplish that? Because I think there's, I guess, a lot of some various different ways, but I think that would be helpful because it feels conceptual, and then it's like, what's the next step?
Yeah. So tell me what you mean by tools, Tim.
Um, Ways to make your presentation stick, basically. Like
Yes.
how do you go about it? Using, like we talked about statistics or different aspects of the presentation. Like, how do you put that together?
Sure. Sure.
Um,
Yeah, I can give you a
with
little
all of that considered.
boot camp. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I referenced the idea of movies and storytelling earlier, and that's in
Yeah.
part because every good communication, even if it's 60 seconds, we'll give you 90. 60 is pretty short. Whether
Yeah.
it's a 90-minute, 90-second conversation, or whether it is that full speech and presentation, good presenters from Martin Luther King to Winston Churchill to Michelle Obama, if you study their speeches and you study the structure that they use, it all mimics that three-act structure that we see in cinema, that we see in stories. So your every presentation should have a structure to it at its foundation. Within that, a catchy opening, so a way to hook your audience. And you can do that in a variety of ways. It can be the self-deprecating comment that's maybe tied to something another employee or speaker said. It can be a startling statistic. It
Mhm.
can be a question that you're posing to the audience. It can be sharing a short story of something that happened to you on the drive to that meeting or to that conference. So you want to get the audience off the top with something that is interesting to them, that makes me say, hey, I want to listen to what this person's going to say next. You have a very small window to grab that attention before people tune out or decide, hey, I'm going to give Tim or Christy a shot to listen a little bit more. So you start with that hook. And then the middle of your presentation is addressing whatever you've decided that main theme is that you're sharing off the top of your presentation. And you always in that main theme you present off the top want to share, why should my audience care? And what do I want my audience to do about it? Those are the two things that you want to make clear. Hey, audience, I want you to listen because this is how this affects you or the circle in which you act, whether it's your staff, whether it's your clients, whether it's people within your association. And here's what I want you to do about it. You don't go into depth about it. That's going to come later, but you start with that.
Mhm.
Then the middle of your presentation is where all that excitement happens. Think about the middle of any movie where we have that contrast of calm moments and then exciting moments, or a character runs into a roadblock and then they overcome it, or we go back in time and look at a flashback and then we zip into the present time or into the future. Yet again, as you consistently look at great presentations and communications, they have that contrast throughout. So it's presenting to your audience ideas of talking about what their issues are and then describing how you're going to address it, or using a something that's happened recently in your business or in your professional world, and presenting to them what might be a potential solution. It's really important that you have that rhythm throughout to take the audience on a journey. And throughout that, what you overlay are stories and statistics. This is where you really get to showcase as a business, especially if you are presenting and communicating for business development purposes. This is where you get to share some of the success stories of your clients or the people you've partnered with. And you're sharing what situation they were in when they came into work with you, the tools that you enabled them with, and then the successes that they had at the end of the work together. Or if you are teaching, even if it's a harassment seminar, you're maybe going to share some stories that have not happy endings. You're going to share some stories of cases where companies were fined millions of dollars or people lost their jobs as a result of a misstep, because it's those stories that stick in our brain so much more powerfully than statistics. When we present just data and just facts, we have two areas of our brain that light up. Broca's region and Wernicke's region, and those are strictly language processing. So Tim's spouting statistics, I'm hearing them, great. When I share a story that instead demonstrates what the statistic is, I have 8 areas of my brain that light up. And those include your sensory processing areas. So when you tell a really good story, you get taken into the shoes of the characters, and that's sealed in our brain. So that's why it's so important to intersperse those stories or examples in the middle of the presentation. Now, that said, data is very important. I work with a lot of clients who are in STEM fields, they are in finance, they are in law. It's very important that they present facts and that they are presenting percentages, but it's giving context to statistics and data. So what I see all the time in presentations, in status updates, in meetings is someone clicking through 1,000,001 slides with graphs that nobody can read what is on, what the data points are. You have legends and menus that the font is probably size 10 on your PowerPoint, and when you project it or even look at it virtually, I can't read what's on it. What you need is to give me context. So always sharing the data, but let's say that I share there are 4.5 million people that were experienced a security breach this year. I'm just making the statistic up.
Yeah.
Is that a big number? Is that a small number? What is the significance here? This is where you would want to anchor that data to something your audience understands. So let's say that you live in the state of Texas. What you're going to do is or we'll go with Arizona since that's where I'm based. Chase Field is the name of our baseball stadium here. I would, if I had an audience that's based in Arizona, tell them, 4.5 million people is the equivalent of 37 stadiums, 37 Chase Fields full of people. So you create a visual that someone can see in their head the gravity of the number, opposed to just spouting out what the statistic is.
Right.
And to that end, also, as you're spouting numbers, what's the takeaway you want your audience to have, especially when you're presenting to executives? What is the kicker? Get to the point, then share the data, then go back to the point again. So you're not leaving the audience hanging.
Right.
And then finally, in any presentation, any great communication, what is it I want to leave you with? Do I want to leave you feeling inspired to go and circulate my idea? Do I need you to functionally go and approve this budget so I can bring these new people on my team? You need to be crystal clear on your calls to action, and you may have multiple calls to action depending on who's in the room. You might have multiple different requests of the people in the room. And then you remind them why entertaining your idea, listening to what you've said is going to put them or their teams in a better place. Or if it's a crisis situation or a situation where we're trying to prevent something really negative from happening, remind your audience of the gravity of not following this plan. Mm-hmm. So that it enforces, it's okay to instill a little bit of fear in your audience to motivate them to say, hey, we need to stay on track with what's been shared or recommended today.
And do you do that? So just structurally, is that part of the message in the beginning, middle, and end as well? I mean, do you say this is, I mean, maybe not like verbatim, but kind of this is the goal basically here's the supporting evidence, and then reiterate the goal.
I think you can never state your goal too many times.
Right.
The middle should really be the beautiful detail and support where you're
Yeah.
presenting the evidence, presenting the stories. So it's really at the front that you're sharing, hey, this is what I want, and this is why it's important for you.
Right.
Off the top, you're reiterating it at the end, and then the middle is your support of those two bookends. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. The So I guess the other part, the last part is, or of this anyway, in my mind, and if there's other elements you want to talk about, then please.
Yeah, please.
But I think the last part to me about this is the delivery of like how to, because it's if you put all the effort into getting the messaging right and having the stories and having the stats and data and building a compelling case essentially, and whether it be a presentation or just in how you're going to talk, but then how do you deliver that? How do you deliver the goods, basically? Because I think that is even after all of that, I think then you're back to you're standing on stage, whether it's slides or if it's just you, like it just feels like that's it, that's the hard part.
And it is. It is. And the people often spend so much time, even out of avoidance, they'll put so much time on the front end of getting the data, building the slide, preparing the message, believing that that alone will be compelling enough. It isn't. And B, it's a procrastination technique in and of itself to not have to deal with the delivery. So this goes back to a theme we talked about earlier, Tim, of conversational delivery is the best. How do you present something conversationally? Well, you format it for yourself and you practice it not by memorizing. Memorizing is the death of authentic presentations. If you're very nervous, absolutely, you can memorize a few opening lines, or if you have a strong closing where the precise verbiage has to be right, those are the only two times I recommend that someone presents their speech. But what happens with slides especially is people start a presentation, they build a presentation by opening a slide deck software. I want you to stop that right now. I know everybody in the room is saying, no, Christy, that's how I build it. If you don't have a foundation that you've created outside of the deck, then you are more likely to figure out what you're going to say on stage and be dependent upon looking at your deck the whole time, which is completely disengaging. So think about if I'm constantly turning like this to look at my slide, I lose all of the facial cues that are and the expressions that are communicating a big part of my message. B, it's showing my audience that I don't really know what I'm talking about because I have to look at it. So your content, you should know in and out so well that you don't even need a deck. And what that does is allows it to be a supplement. The deck should be the cherry on the top of the cupcake or the sundae. All of that minute detail, your audience isn't going to digest it in the moment anyway. So giving a pre-read to your audience, sending them a leave behind, if executives need to make a decision or team members need to make a decision, they're not going to make it staring at that chart on that they can't even read in the moment. They're going to make the decision based on the powerful themes that you're presenting and takeaways. So how do you get around the nerves, to your earlier question? This is different for each person. And this is where I work with each client, or when I work with teams, we figure out what works best for you. For people who are auditory learners, I'll even have them speak their presentation or themes into a voice dictation software. So they do a brain dump to get all the ideas out. And then we go back in and start to create some order to it. And then they practice again and again, saying aloud to get comfortable with the flow of the presentation. Having a deck as a visual cue is great to cue you alone, not to tell you what to say. It shouldn't be a teleprompter, but to cue you to what the next concept is going to be. Other learners are much more visual. The verbal dump doesn't work. So I work with them to outline the structure of their presentation in a written form. But regardless, I never want your time on stage or your time in the boardroom or on the Zoom call to be the first time you've actually presented that presentation. And the number of times I see it, I would be wealthy and retired if I had $1 for every time I saw somebody put 90% of the effort into building the thing and then they don't focus on the delivery. So it's no different. I use, and this is a true story. Many years ago, I received a gift from a partner at the time that was wrapped inside of a cardboard box that your Keurig refills came in. And he had shoved like some tissue around it. And inside of it was actually a piece of jewelry. It was a very nice gift, but the presentation was so terrible, so utterly terrible. And it became kind of a running joke between the two of us.
Yeah.
You don't want to diminish the jewel of all of your hard work and your expertise by wrapping it inside of a Keurig box with some crumpled green paper. And that's what we do when we don't take the time to work on the delivery. And to that end, people are going to hate it when I say this, but it's a game changer. You have to record yourself. You have to go through that uncomfortable process. And it doesn't mean setting up a formal camera. Just turn on your cell phone. And while you're folding laundry, while you're getting dinner ready, you're walking the dog, take that time to present into the camera what your presentation is, and go back and watch yourself. You'll know if you sound tone deaf, or if you sound monotone rather. You'll
Right.
know if when you're presenting at a desk, you suddenly discover you have a swivel chair, and when you present at your desk, you start
Yeah.
doing that swivel. Or if you're presenting in a boardroom, you'll discover if you're the person that rocks back and forth. And the only way that we can overcome these habits is to face them head on. It's time to stop living in denial that we have some of these habits, because just like going back to the pro athlete analogy, that's why you watch game tape and you go back and the coach is circling specifically, this is where I need you to change, whether it's the way you're moving your shoulder if you're a pitcher, or whether it is the length of your stride if you're a runner. As a speaker and as a communicator, you need to do the same thing, looking at your tone, looking at your facial expressions,
Yeah.
looking at those dreaded ums and ahs.
Yes.
Are you breathing? Are you taking time to breathe? That really affects people's anxiety and their delivery. People stop breathing when they present. So I work with clients as well to help them put breathing practices, grounding practices, meditation practices in place so that by the time they go up and speak, their body is in this really centered space and the delivery is much calmer and more natural.
Yeah, the breathing. I've had an experience where I was speaking at a difficult time, and I was having a hard time getting the words
Yeah.
out, and somebody came up and was like, "Just breathe," because you can't.
Yeah.
When it opens up it opened up my ability to actually speak once I started breathing, which
Yes.
sounds
Breathing. Yeah.
normal, but or
Yeah.
intuitive, but it's not necessarily.
When the adrenaline is going and we're not breathing, our brain is shutting down and our body is shutting down.
Right.
And I'll often hear from leaders when I'm in this high stakes situation or emotionally charged situation, I can't catch my breath. My heart is beating out of my chest.
Yeah.
When we take the time to breathe deeply and breathe slowly, our brain can go into the mental filing cabinet to think about what we prepared. If it's extemporaneous, we can take the time to think about what do I say next strategically. And
Yeah.
just even having good breathing, practicing what's called diaphragmatic breathing. If anybody plays an instrument or they've been a singer, you've probably heard about this breathing technique. It's breathing from our belly instead of our chest. Where day to day, where you and I, Tim, are working on the computer, we're shallow breathing. We're not taking deep breaths. When you take the bigger breaths, you can project more. That shaking voice goes away because there's more air that is passing through our windpipe and we're projecting more loudly. So that timidity and shakiness often is overcome by using your breath better. It's a big piece of it.
Right. I wanted to ask if the audience actually, if you have any questions for Christy, to use the chat and go ahead and ask her some questions. But if for just maybe to touch on, and then I want them to be able to get in touch with you as well for coaching for their own opportunities to speak. But one thing that we talked about briefly is and I know we don't have time to cover the whole topic, but is how to get these speaking opportunities. So it's kind of putting all the speaking part aside, but maybe like a cliff notes on that for a second, and then
Sure.
I'll take some questions and then we can wrap up.
Absolutely. One of the best ways to promote your brand, to get in front of audiences, is to speak at events. And this is especially true if you are not, if you hate networking, that's me. If you hate those awkward approaches of people in the room, that is me. I am an introvert through and through. What happens when you speak is people come to talk to you at the end of the presentation.
Mm.
So you magnetize people to come ask you questions, and you get a chance to showcase your expertise, what your company does. Conferences are always looking for presenters, but I tell people, don't start with a conference. That can feel intimidating or scary. Start with something like what we're doing today. Who in your industry do you know that has a webinar or they have a podcast? Speaking can happen in many different forms. Maybe internally in your company, there's an opportunity to say, hey, I'd like to host a lunch and learn about a topic I'm really passionate about. And as you get more and more practice through doing that, then you're going to be better equipped that when you want to go on a big stage at a conference, at an event, you've really crafted your messaging, you've crafted your delivery,
Yeah.
you've dialed it in. And if you've been recording it, what you do is you take clips of that and you create what's called a sizzle reel in the world of professional speaking, or even we use it in the world of broadcasting. It's short clips demonstrating to the conference organizer that you do a good job. And most people do not send that. When most people submit to speak at a conference, they have a long, boring proposal. It has 75 bullet points in it. I'm not dismissing that you need substance in what you're presenting,
Yeah, of course.
but presenting is different than paper. The people organizing want to see you can do a good job. So take those smaller gigs, if you will, save the content, and when you submit to speak, share that with the organizer.
Right. Yeah, lower stakes. I think those smaller, whether it be a webinar or like something in the, within your company, as opposed
Yes.
to, having whatever, 100, 500, 1,000 people at a
Yes.
major conference, and like that's your entree into the to the speaking
Yes,
world.
that can be intimidating to say the least. We want to take baby steps. We're going to start at the community swim meet before you go to the Olympics.
I guess that makes sense.
Yeah.
So how can everyone get in touch with you?
All you have to do is Google my name. I'm not hard to find. So Christy Siefkin, if you just Google that, you can find me on my website. I'm on Instagram. I'm on X. I'm on Facebook. My email, I'm happy to share with you as well, to post within the webinar after the fact.
Yeah,
And
we'll do
I
that.
usually set up a call to discover what needs people have individually. I do a lot of individual coaching with leadership, but I also do workshops where I go into companies and
Yeah,
help their teams communicate. So whether it's you have sales teams or business development teams that really need to solidify their messaging, I work with a lot of boards to help make sure they're communicating their message and their story consistently. I
right.
do media trainings for organizations that are going to be on podcasts. They want to start a podcast. They need to have their leaders be subject matter experts. So I offer group training and individual training. And then I also keynote about communications at events. So it's another fun way for bigger audiences to learn some of these tips and tricks with a lot more of those fun stories cooked in between that we didn't quite have time to get into today.
Yeah, that's great. This has been so great. I thank you so much
Thank you,
for your
Tim.
time.
Of course, my
And
pleasure. Thank you for having me.
yeah, and I will I'll send out the recording to the audience, and everybody who registered, and I'll have your contact information there so you can get in touch with Christy.
Fantastic.
So thanks again, Christy, and we'll talk to you
Thank
soon.
you, Tim.
Okay,
And don't
thanks
be
everyone.
afraid. Get out there and practice. You guys have got this.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for joining. Have a great day.